here, and can I say, in my humble opinion, there hasn't been a book that has shifted the community's way of thinking and way of acting since 50 Shades of Grey. I have today, in the latest episode of a chat with Michael Warner, known as Mick, who is the writer of The Boys Club. He's here to talk about the book that is the rage at the moment. And if you haven't read it, in around about half an hour's time, you'll know why you want to get onto it. Mick Warner, welcome to Lace Out.
Hello, Peps. Thanks for having me, mate. And I must say, I've had the book described to me a lot of different ways, but not 50 Shades of Grey. That's a new one.
Oh, well, if you remember when that came out, it just changed everything. And now this book, from what's been happening, politics, power, and the AFL over the last week, it's almost you cannot turn on the news, turn on the radio, any show at the moment, referencing it in some point, referencing you as a person or referencing the book and the scandals that have come out of it. And, you know, with myself and my colleague, Jamie, every week we always say, could you imagine the pile of gunk that has been swept under the rug at the AFL for years? Wouldn't it be great to be a fly on the wall? Out of the blue, it was almost like the football god said, here's Michael Warner, I'm going to write it for you.
No, thanks for that, mate. Look, it took 3.5 years to write, and having covered the sport for 20 years at the Herald Sun, I started in 1998, and I've sort of been through all of the scandals right back to the Carlton salary cap days of 2002 and the Eagles drug saga and tanking and Essendon and Talia and on it goes. So, and one of the reasons I wrote it is because it sort of annoyed me that, you know, the game would talk for a week or two about the scandals, and then the caravan would move on and we'd sort of forget all about it. And that the behaviours and the conduct, you know, it was condemned at the time, but then it just went on and you know, because they're not like a government that gets voted out, the AFL, they're there permanently. It never gets refreshed. So I thought I'll put it in one place so footy fans can read it for themselves.
And like I said, I have been glued to this. They often say in football there's champions, and that gets thrown around quite a fair bit. Page Turner gets thrown around quite a fair bit, but this one, I haven't been able to put it down. But you know why? It's because it's honest, it's relevant, and everything that we've been going through at the moment with the whole COVID bits and pieces from last year, and then we're moving it into it again this year. You've even referenced it towards the back of the book, and just some of the things that, like, I was shocked about, especially when it came to the pay and when what the AFL wanted the players to do compared to what they were going to take on themselves.
The money's really at the root of all of this, and the product, as I say, of Australian rules football and at the top level, the AFL it's just such an incredible product that, you know, they were getting 120,000 people at the MCG 100 years ago. And it's not like this modern AFL administration invented this product. They were lucky to inherit it. And once they commercialised it, which was inevitable as all sport around the world went, the rivers of gold just piled up. You know, the TV money alone went from $200,000 a year TV rights to what it is now. It's about $417 million a year. The AFL's bringing in revenues of $700-800 million. It doesn't pay tax, which is an extraordinary thing in itself. And it's its own world governing body, so it can pay itself and its executives pretty much whatever it wants. You know, we know before COVID, the 12 or so execs were getting about $890,000 a year each, which is basically more than Patrick Dangerfield gets. You know, when Demetriou was in his last year, he got $3.8 million. That's 4 times more than Dustin Martin earns. You know, it was just becoming out of control. And COVID, to an extent, has actually saved the game in terms of that recklessness. It's just put the handbrake on and allowed the clubs and everyone to take some time and actually look at the system. And as we know, some club presidents are pushing for a review. Hopefully this book and some of the revelations about the mistreatment of women that have emerged in recent days, and through my book and Jess Halloran's work in Australian, will push that along, because the game is long overdue for a review.
Well, we'll get onto the pay side of things in a moment, but you've brought up all of the harassment side of things that have happened at the AFL. And once again, for a person who sits outside, who just watches the game and enjoys it, when you read this and how often and for how long it was going on, and some of the conduct, like, it just sits back and go, how does this get hidden? How big did you discover this as you were writing the book? That's this bad?
quite disturbing, isn't it? When you see that, payouts of $200,000 for bullying and the like, and women talking about, it's horrible to discuss, but saying that at various stages that they thought that they would be better off not being alive. As such was the torment that they experienced. The problem for the AFL is that it preaches all of these sort of woke's not the right word, but they the way that they tell the community to behave, but it's clear that they weren't necessarily living those values themselves. So that's just one aspect of this very powerful organisation. Richard Goyder, the chairman of the AFL, hasn't actually come out. A letter was leaked to the Age, which is usually the modus operandi, in terms of that dealing with these things, that the letters mysteriously turn up in the Age saying that we need to do better. Well, I don't think that's quite an adequate response. I'm hoping that Richard Goyder and the Commission at some stage come out and actually hold a press conference and talk about these things.
But let's be honest, if we go by their strike rate over the last 10 odd so years, the chances of that happening, I don't think are going to happen, because, like I said, if you go through, that's just one of the things. We've had drug sagas. We've had people in Las Vegas having issues over there. We've had lots of tanking, paper bags left, right and centre. And you're right, they sort of address it for a week and then it sort of drifts off into the no man's land and another topic comes up.
Because they're not accountable to anyone. They're their own world governing body, as I say, and so there's no transparency. Integrity investigations are policed the way that they want to, preferred outcomes. And when you look at it all piled up together, as I try to do in the book, it's a pretty disturbing pattern of behaviour. And they would say that they've got no issues, that the game, look at the commercial size of the game, we can do no wrong, but I say there's another scoreboard or another measuring stick that's just as important as commercial success, and that's the way you treat people and your commitment to all of those issues. I talk about transparency and accountability. So, but they've been pushed around before. The Essendon saga, I think, was as close as they came to staring their fate in the face, and they marched on and survived that. So if they got through that, they'll probably pretty much get through anything, Peps.
Well, this drug saga, look, I don't want to spend too much time on that because that's been done to death. But what surprised me was the three other clubs, Geelong, Gold Coast, and my team, Melbourne, who did have some sort of dealings with Dank and Robinson, etc. How did those three clubs not really have much investigation to the level that Essendon had?
I just find it incongruous as well. Obviously the Essendon thing was was on a much wider scale, and it was a more formalised situation. But there's no doubt that Nathan Bock, for example, was provided with the same substance that the Cronulla players in the NRL were wiped out for, and he nothing ever happened to the Gold Coast Suns, which of course was run by the AFL. It's not off the umbilical cord. Mm-hmm. We know that Dean Robinson and Dank were involved in the back rooms background at Geelong with the active vegan. Of course, that's a legal supplement, which Dank was saying he was sending down to the club. And we know, of course, that Dank from those text messages was involved at Geelong, and there was some off-site intravenous drips, etc., given to Melbourne players. That the answer, of course, is that the industry didn't really want to go down that road, so they were quite comfortable to leave it at Essendon. But again, it's unsatisfactory, isn't it, when you see all the evidence as to, because we were talking about governance failings, we're not talking about doping, we're just talking simply about governance. Which is what the AFL punished Essendon for. So there's so many. The Essendon drug saga went for 5 years. It's the most complex story. I've tried to tell it as best as I can in a chapter. But there's really, I've spent many, many hours of my life talking to people about it, and you keep going down rabbit holes that you'll never come out of.
Well, you mentioned in an interview, I think on 3AW last week, Julian De Stoop's book, The Straight Dope, and I read that on a plane flying over to England.
Chip Legrand's book.
Oh, Chip Legrand's book, sorry. I'll change it over. Absolute corker, right?
I'm sure Jules has got a book in him.
He's probably got a book, yeah, but Chip Legrand, sorry. He's got his book coming. He's got his book, and I read that a little bit like yours, just like, you can't be right.
Yeah,
This can't
yeah.
be right. This
Great
can't
book.
be right. That's a great book. This almost just takes it to another level. We're not looking at club land. We're looking at AFL land.
Yeah, I was looking at it from the way the AFL wanted to handle / manipulate the investigation for its own advantage. And that's the problem with being the judge, jury and executioner. The commercial interests for the AFL are always going to be a priority over the truth. And so this push for a national sports integrity body sounds a bit boring, but, up in Canberra, David Sharp, who runs that, they're saying, look, we should really be running a lot of these major things and taking it away from the sports, but that's up to the sports to surrender it. It's up to governments to make it happen. But when you see, for example, the tanking saga with Melbourne,
Wasn't proven.
I don't know what tanking is. Well, the transcript will tell you what tanking is.
We can tell you what it is.
Yeah.
The players can tell you. The supporters can tell you. But when the commission, the chief comes out and says, I don't know what the definition of it is, you're just like, you
really? But that's another example. Okay, he was sort of, ridiculed for a few days, Gillon McLachlan, after he said that. But then the show moves on. It just becomes something in the past and is forgotten about. And I end the book sort of talking about the tragedy, really, of the way that Dean Bailey was fingered with it all. And we know that Dean Bailey wasn't solely responsible for what happened.
No, I remember when he left Melbourne after the 186.
Oh, yeah.
And that press conference.
Was that a tough day for you, that one?
That was, I was playing footy that day and copped a massive corky, so I had a bad morning, and then I had blokes telling me, Peps, mate, you're 15 goals down and it's halfway through the second quarter. I'm like, you kidding, aren't you? And I'm just getting text messages as the numbers went up. Yeah, it wasn't a pretty day. His press conference when he left Melbourne was just you could not say a bad word about the bloke after seeing that.
No,
it was just
a class act.
It was a class act. Exactly right.
He tried to sort of blow the whistle on it then when Mark Robinson asked him in the press conference that day if he tanked, basically, and he sort of gave an answer which suggested that they had, and then the AFL quickly moved with a little quasi-investigation to shut that down. It wasn't until Brock McLean went on the couch, which, funnily enough, Brock McLean wasn't meant to be on the couch on Fox Footy that night. Chris Judd was supposed to be, and he actually fell ill that afternoon, and they scrambled to get Brock McLean, and he went on and he drops that bomb. I'm telling you, if Brock McLean didn't go on that show, it's love the sliding doors moments. We may never have actually had the tanking investigation and the emergence of the transcripts or anything. It's
well, that's your blind Freddie, isn't it? That was he actually said you'd have to be blind Freddie not to see what was going on. And can I just say, keep going.
No, I was just going to say that the other aspect to all of that, it was the AFL's crazy idea in the first place to have a priority picks carrot dangling in front of these clubs. That was the reason that they were doing it. Melbourne weren't, like you said with Essendon and the Danklinks, Melbourne weren't the only team that was trying to lose matches in that era. I mean, I didn't quite explore that in depth in the book, but there are many clubs who benefited from.
West Coast weren't going too flash. Yeah, you're right. There are other clubs, and they didn't do anything outside of their rules. It was almost that the AFL couldn't do anything. You even wrote sort of this where you said they couldn't actually do anything because technically they didn't break the rules that the AFL had set up. If you lose this many games, So but
the rules that they did break, Peps, was in terms of all the people, maybe even yourself, who might have backed Melbourne that year, gambling-wise. The Victorian Casino and Gambling Authority, which failed miserably with Crown Casino, as we know, because it took a New South Wales independent inquiry to actually expose what the VCGLR couldn't in Melbourne with Crown. Same thing with the AFL, with tanking and Talia. These are incidents that involve gambling licences, and the AFL was able to concoct outcomes that meant that it wouldn't be in breach of those regulations, and those authorities, those regulators simply believed what they were being told by the AFL.
Unbelievable. And it just, you look at it and go, where is it going to stop? Like, even to the point now, the AFL want to be in control. This is something like, I think this might have even been last week, the ball sponsorship. Like, now they want to, the clubs work so hard to generate these sponsors for themselves. They build these relationships. They build it to a point that, you know what, the AFL had control of it first, I think, with the McFooties, and they had the Volkswagens, and it sort of blew out from there. And now they're trying to bring it all back in. It's like, oh, well, too bad. If whatever you've done, we're just going to override that with McDonald's.
Well, that's
them
the
taking
issue
control of it again.
That you've hit the nail on there, though, is that the clubs, the commission model that was set up in 1984 and then supercharged in 93 was really designed for the clubs to administer the game, but it sort of morphed across a generation into this dictatorship where they tell the clubs how they can tie their own shoelaces up. You can do this, you can't do this, we'll pay you this, you can't have a certain amount of money. And so the clubs have become so subservient. And not only that, but that boards are often sort of handpicked by the AFL as well, so you don't actually get that many Jeff Kennetts out there who are prepared to rock the boat. Eddie Maguire always say walk both sides of the street. He often did what was best for Collingwood. Well, he always did what was best for Collingwood, of course, but he also was too close to the AFL.
Yes.
And so when big issues came where the clubs needed to stand up, even last year, when there was a push for a review, certain clubs, Andrew Pridham and Kennett and Peggy O'Neill's put their name to it, but Eddie didn't. And then, of course, Eddie got run out of town himself in February.
He got run out of town, and that's something that you really do well in the book is you connect all the dots. That was a thing that fascinated me throughout as going through each chapter, just how everybody knows somebody who worked with somebody who played with somebody. So I've worked out if I ever want to get a job at the AFL, I've got to play high-grade amateur football. I've got to be from the country, maybe have to know Craig Kelly in some capacity, and if I can get on the board of a football club, I'm almost made it because there's
a web of connections there that, a lot of people have said that reading the book that fascinates them the most is just that how interconnected it is sitting on each other's boards. And the general public don't know any of that. One of the things that's always fascinated me was then that mum, Sarah, just bobbed up out of the blue on Triple M that morning. Of course, no one ever knows if she is a mum called Sarah because no one ever actually bothered to check her identity or take her phone number. We just assumed, we accepted it anonymously. Just little things like that. But as I said, when you pile them all up, what a story it tells.
Oh, it's a massive sniff test, isn't it? There's a lot of sniff tests going on. Hey, listen, I also reckon you're pretty cool? The titles of your chapters. Like some of these chapters, 3 Strikes, Born to Rule, Flatlining in Vegas, Mafia Dons, the Kelly Gang. Which was the chapter that you went, I'm actually really enjoying putting this one together?
Oh, definitely Cashed Up Bogans because that's the Essendon chapter. And I've always thought that the public was almost directed by the media campaign that the AFL ran to have a different way of thinking about the Essendon saga. And I'm sure I won't convince everyone, but I would just implore anyone to read the way I see the Essendon thing unfolding through Cashed Up Bogans, which is what the James Hurd's lawyer Stephen Amendola said of the AFL. He said they acted like a bunch of cashed up bogans who thought that they could behave in any way they please, which I could have resonated with me, that quote. So that's why I called it that. But that was the most difficult chapter, but also the one that I think sort of best demonstrates the message I'm trying to convey about the way that you'd never underestimate their strategic capabilities. Cashed Up Bogans probably selling them a bit short in the sense of these are very, very smart people. Even the way they're moving the teams around with COVID. Can you imagine how difficult? So then this is the thing. I'm not saying, that these people aren't in one capacity outstanding at running the sport, but it's that other measuring stick that I say where they failed miserably.
Yeah, like I said, we could go through each chapter and we'd have a 19 episode serial on this thing if we kept going. There's 2 people that, if you take it back a step, who at the time when they said things, I don't think it's referenced in your book, Dale Lewis, when he came out and spoke about the drugs in AFL and he virtually got thrown under the bus.
Yeah.
And another bloke.
Plenty of people went under that bus.
Definitely went under that bus. And the other one was Mark Jackson when he was on Mike Sheehan's open mic and he got stuck into the AFL about the rules and they're not answerable to anybody. There used to be a rules of the game committee that looked after everything in the country, but they're the one-stop shop, etc. And people think, this guy's nuts. When you look at what you've written, he got it right 100% that they are judge, jury, executioner, everything when it comes to what the 18 teams and what us as followers have to go through on a weekly basis.
Well, that's one of the other things that annoys me is how great football people like Dennis Pagan, Kevin Bartlett, Mick Malthouse, Lee Matthews, Richard Collis, when you get into administration, why aren't these people who know the game, the core product of Australian rules, how to run clubs, why aren't they on the AFL Commission? Why have we got all these AFL commissioners who are sort of merchant bankers or something living in interstate? They don't even – it's all by design, of course, because the real power of the AFL is the executive in Melbourne. It's not the commission. Executive is the real brains and operations of the league. The commission is more of this honorary thing, out of mind, out of sight. It's lost its oversight. That's another part of the review that I'd like to see, getting some actual football people. It is a football competition, Peps. Let's remember, it might be a business, but the game that we love as played as kids and through our adult life is the product should be better. I don't actually talk about on-field at all in the book.
No, you don't. No, that's another thing about it. There's nothing related to on-field anything across the board. The only on-field stuff that you sort of get to where it's involving players was the Talia brothers, which I'll ask you on in a moment.
Yeah.
You spoke about the Kurt Tippett thing and just the little bits and pieces behind that. Okay, if he leaves, we need a second-round draft pick and like the draft tampering side of things there. But the buddy to the Swans. Like that was the one that was just, whoa, seriously? And then what the AFL did after that, and I'll let you elaborate on it, but how they then got stuck in and said, Swans, you can't do this for the next couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
For
the
what?
Trade ban.
For what?
As Richard Collis said, the greatest act of bastardry he's ever seen in his 40 years in football was that the Swans, we still don't really know what the Swans were punished for apart from being really good at recruiting and convincing Buddy to go to Sydney. Oh. And I know he hasn't won a flag, but geez, it's been a pretty good move.
Oh, it's been a great move for them. Look, they've had Lockett up there. They've had Franklin. I don't know who the next one will be to go up there, but he has been sensational.
Hopefully not Martin.
How many years has he got left? Has he got a couple more left on his contract?
Yeah, he has. But look, the point of that one was that the Sydney Swans is the single most important team in the competition when you look at it from a national competition perspective. If you didn't have a successful, and boy, have they been a successful club, Sydney, it's such a great culture. They win premierships, they're good people. Tom Harley, Richard Collis, all these guys, Andrew Pridden, their class. And without the Sydney Swans being the team it is, the competition doesn't have that sort of status it requires. And yet when Richard Collis recruits Buddy, he keeps that phone call from Mike Fitzpatrick, which his wife could hear in the next room, abusing him, which just sort of summed it all up, the way that these guys think that they can conduct themselves. And I know Richard Collis to this day is still sort of mortified at the way that he was respected, or the lack of respect that was shown to him.
And Fitzpatrick denied that actually happened, and then he pulled out.
He didn't deny the call took place. He admitted that the phone call, he actually said later on an open mic interview that you every now and then you got to put a marker down. He, I think, denies sort of that the AFL had tried to break its own rules in trying to get Buddy to the Giants.
That's what it was all about. Let's call a spade a spade. They wanted him to go to the Giants. They knew, Izzy Folau had not worked. Carmichael Hunt hadn't worked. So let's just try and get the biggest star within the game to go to our.
Well, that's the allegation. Yeah, I don't know for a fact that, but certainly the Swans say that.
Yeah.
But everyone I know thought. I actually always kicked myself because about a week before Buddy went to Sydney, a mate of mine rang me and said, I reckon that's Buddy's going to the Swans. And I was like, I just totally dismissed it out of hand. I thought, that's not right.
That can't be
happening. And I should have actually picked up the phone and maybe try to break the story, because a week later when it came out, I was like, holy, what a great move from Sydney.
But there's only a certain amount of stories that you can break, and you've had some big ones. Is there one at the moment? Is there one that's sitting there that you haven't, I won't say broken, because that wouldn't exactly, you wouldn't tell me because you wouldn't break, but is there a story that you'd like to get your teeth into?
There's always little things floating around in the ether.
Yep.
But they're I mean, one of the things with this book that I was able to do, and it was sort of the basis of the book, is when I said that the caravan moves on, I always think, no, there's more here. So, for example, that West Coast Eagles secret report that the judge did, that sat in the bottom drawer at AFL House for 10 years. And I know Gil McLaughlin said only 3 copies were ever made. But I was always of the view, I'm going to get that report. And because I know what that report will contain the truth. It's the same with the Melbourne tanking transcripts. Yep. They were sitting in a bottom drawer for 7 years. I'm saying to myself, I'm going to get those transcripts somehow. And then, of course, you know, the Talia documents that emerged, you know, everyone moved on. Oh, yeah, there's all nothing to see here. But so I guess the basis of my book, and same with the Essendon story, I was never satisfied with the answers that we were being spoon-fed. And so I just sort of kept hanging around those ponds, putting the rod in the water, seeing if I could find something. And that's sort of the basis of the book, is that on all of these major integrity investigations, when you actually get to what really happened through documents, which can't be disputed, that's the beauty of documents, especially when it's the AFL's own documents, that's where the truth lies. And so that's sort of the essence of the book.
Well, you referenced the Gubby Allen, Lockie Whitfield one as well too. I think that sat in a drawer for 18 months, and as soon as he goes down to Collingwood, hey, we've got this document, let's get into it. And
yeah, well, that was really interesting because on the same night, it was about 10 hours after Gubby Allen defected from the GWS to Collingwood, the Age and the Australian both got a leak. I have no idea who it was from, basically saying that Gubby Allen had been involved in this Whitfield situation. Now, the leak was designed to blow up Collingwood and Gubby Allen, which it did. If you remember, Gubby never actually took on that job at Collingwood. It's probably the beginning of the end for Collingwood, actually. But you're right, that story had sat dormant for whatever reason for 18 months. It probably may have sat dormant forever unless it was leaked out. And it wasn't leaked out actually to get Whitfield.
No.
It was leaked out to get Gubby.
And you sit back later and Gubby cops his fair whack, Whitfield cops his fair whack. One thing I've also gathered from your book too is that if you ever get let go or get stood down by the AFL, you're going to get a very, very good education, whether it's in France, whether it's in New York. You are going to be set. We're not hurting your career. We're going to pay you, and we're also going to send you over to go on short business courses to enhance your career for when you come back.
Well, that James Hird one was the greatest one, where he's been portrayed as the villain of the Essendon saga by the AFL, and in the background they're plotting to get him into Oxford University and pay him, you know, $1 million. I mean, you know, the desire to get the outcome knows no bounds. Certainly hope if I ever get made forced out of my job that I get sent to Oxford as well.
Oh, I hope so. Take me with you so I can enhance mine. Now, I have to ask you, the Talia brothers, like I think out of all of them, this was probably the most obscure one that I think faded quite quickly, but it was actually a big one at the time. And I love the way that you started the chapter off where it says Luke Beveridge smelt a rat.
Yeah.
And then just go from there. So for the people who can't remember the Talia brothers one, because all the other topics that you have in here are quite big, well-known, but this one, it happened in 2014 final.
Yep. 2015,
sorry.
Elimination final at the MCG. Well, the fascinating thing about that, if you remember, that it was a 63-day investigation that ended up being sort of depicted as a practical joke that had been played, and everyone in the football media just accepted that and moved on. But the practical joke, you know, that being that Kyle Chaney, who's playing for Adelaide, had told Luke Beveridge eventually, after telling a couple of Hawthorn ex-teammates, you know, that they'd used inside information the Adelaide Crows provided from Michael Tarley, who was at the Western Bulldogs, to his brother Daniel Tarley, which then went up into the, you know, the team used, knowing certain things like where Jake Stringer was going to play and all this sort of stuff. And it just got pushed aside. But then again, I was able to get my hands on the Western Bulldogs' actual, you know, long, detailed legal case that they'd run against the AFL. And it quite clearly showed to that detail that in the coach's box during the game, the Dogs had actually kicked the first 3 goals of the game. So they were feeling pretty good. But even then they felt like something wasn't right, just with the way, I think what they were saying is Stringer would go up the field. He was playing for the Bulldogs at this time, obviously. and we're playing a premiership the next year, he'd go up the ground, and yet his team, his opponent wouldn't go with him, which was always the strategy for Stringer to take his man away, right? And so I think that was the first time someone in the box said, "Oh, this is a bit weird," but they didn't think anything of it really. They lost the game. Remember, Tex Walker kicked a magnificent sort of kick across his body to Charlie Cameron, and they won by 7 points. And the Dogs went out and would win the premiership the next year. Funnily enough, that some people at the Dogs reckon they were good enough to win it that year, but don't know about that myself. But then when you actually saw these documents and the collaboration, the other evidence that had emerged, it was damning. And the AFL Integrity Department sort of just dismissed it. Now, it's a very detailed chapter, isn't it, in terms of phone messages going missing and that sort of stuff. But Peter Gordon, who is one of the top lawyers in the country, ran that investigation on behalf of the Bulldogs. He's a very serious lawyer. He knew what he was doing, and he says in the chapter, to this day, he is bewildered and angered by what unfolded there.
You're right. It just came out as a practical joke, and there was, I think it was, who was it? Ben Graham, and was it Corey Enright who was at Adelaide? Like their relationship.
No, it was Darren Milburn.
Darren Milburn.
They were exchanging texts about it as well.
Exactly, and that relationship got strained. It sounds like this as well.
And what really should deeply disturb football fans is the role of the media in helping the AFL cover it up. Because that's one of the things that really gets up my goat, is when you have house-trained media who are either, they just accept the information that they're told, or even worse, so they sort of, whether they know they're doing it, they get used by the AFL to get a narrative out there. And it happened time and time again in the Essendon saga. But, journos have got to be better than that. They're not there to champion a cover-up. Yep. They're there to get to the truth. And I think that a lot of journalists can hang their head in shame about the way that the Talia thing's covered.
Yeah, look, I think you're right, though. I think you've got the reporters who do the right thing for the right reasons, and you've got the other ones who do the right thing for the AFL reasons. But it's not just journos, it's player, it's a whole system, Oh, the Peter Jess scenario when you were talking about Craig Kelly.
He got alien, sort of what's the word? Not ostracised, but
they basically said, "Don't go with him anymore. Come over to Craig Kelly. Come over to us." This is the one.
Peter Jess had 149 players at one stage, but he was huge on wage justice, and as you know, he's a real on his work in concussion now.
Yep.
He's massive in taking on the AFL, and so he sort of got pushed aside. Anyone who takes on the empire, mate, gets pushed aside. Don't be an enemy of the state. Or I famously remember a club president saying to me, "Swim between the flags. You'll make a lot of money." Didn't
they realise in Star Wars you don't go up against Darth? Just don't do it, and life will be. But as soon as you do,
can't beat
you have to find that, exactly. You have to find that weak point and then nail it as quickly as possible. So you just mentioned the concussion. If there was let's just say a 19th chapter, could you see that maybe being the one in years to come going all
definitely.
The way back? Yep.
I regretted, as I got towards publication, I regretted I didn't have more emphasis on concussion, because it's similar in terms of the AFL of denied, maybe not denied, but they've, like a lot of sports, they obviously don't want concussion to be what we all probably think it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And I think in 50 years' time, we'll look back and go, gee, bit slow there, weren't we? We've seen with the sub rule this year, whatever it is, the medical rule, and that it's coming. So concussion's a massive problem for the game. And even that Holman holding the ball the other day where everyone laughed at it. But I'm thinking, tackling's next. One day there's going to be so much litigation around that can a contact. I remember Lee Matthews is the fiercest player of all. He said, I wonder in 4 or 5 decades' time whether the contact sports can actually survive.
It's actually a fair point, because you think about it. He was almost the catalyst for one of the biggest changes in AFL or VFL at that stage by the trial by video, when Neville Bruns decided to show him his forearm, broke his jaw and all that sort of stuff, and now that's just become that's the norm.
The game's been cleaned up, but the problem is that you can get concussed just incidentally, accidentally in footy. The other option is, do you have a waiver or something? But it's not going to be long till there's big payouts to a lot of players. So, I probably wish I had written about concussion. But having said that, again, it's a vexed issue. So it probably doesn't quite belong in that book, does it?
No, it doesn't. No, but that's Mick. That's a tale that you could write it all back. This was the first thing, and then when you've got people like Greg Williams, John Barnes coming out, John Platton's in this as well too.
There's hundreds of them.
Polly Farmer, they're going back as far as Polly Farmer suffering. Yep, exactly right. I remember. I don't know where
Shane
you were.
Tuck.
Yep, well, Shane Tuck, but definitely with the Danny Frawley one. I remember that day. Phones were pinging left, right, and centre. The boys going, "Are you okay? What's going on here?" And you hear about it, and you think. 2 nights before I was watching him, you couldn't tell a thing that was going on. So just because everything looks rosy above the water, the stuff that could be swimming underneath, people.
Oh, absolutely. Mental health. Yeah.
And I've had my challenges with it, and you probably know people who've had challenges with it as well too. And
absolutely.
When people don't understand it, that's when they can be very critical of it.
Totally.
So it is going to be one of those things that I think is going to be massive. Now, I have to ask you this. We love our footy. It is 2021. We know COVID is going to throw everything up again. Well, let's just have a chat. Who is your favourite at the moment? Who do you like running around that you think, they're a massive chance for the flag?
Well, obviously you're going to be happy to hear that it's Melbourne. And I went to the game. I'm a massive Richmond man.
That's all right.
And I went to the game where you dismantled us on a Saturday night, and I thought, that's interesting because we threw everything at you in the first half, and you absorbed it, and then you smoked us. You actually remind me of Richmond in 2017. You got Petrarca, who's the dusty. You got the pain in the past. You got a great defensive system across the game. In fact, I went to Marvel last week to watch the Bulldogs game, and I was one of 12 people there because everyone was locked out. I was doing AW boundary. Mm-hmm. And the leadership that you could hear, like Jake Lever, he's incredible. Obviously, you recruited him for his intercept marking and whatnot, but his actual leadership, he's the captain of the back line. And you can just hear him sort of barking, and Stephen May as well. Everyone criticised you for putting all your money into the salary cap into the back line, but bloody hell there. And Salem as well. I think Melbourne, but you wouldn't want to be losing another Tomlinson. Injuries can ravage a lot
exactly
of
right.
campaigns.
I'm wholly with you. It's we don't know what this is like at the moment. Like I said, if you told us we'd be 10-1 at the start of the year and we've lost that one by a point, I would have gone.
Oh, yeah, it was a good one to lose by a point. You don't want to be getting to 15 straight. No. Yeah, that was a good loss, I reckon, at one point. But Robbo, who I worked with, picked his All-Australian team last week and had 8 Melbourne players in it. And
I think he was a few short, to be honest. I think there were a couple missing. I'm not hanging out. No, look, my travesty is my dad's a massive Melbourne supporter. The whole family's Melbourne supporters. And Dad said to me a few weeks ago, he goes, "Could you just imagine?" This is when everything was going okay. Could you imagine if COVID hits again and we get to a grand final and we can't go and we win by 10 goals and we're not able to see it?
Nah.
Dad, don't be stupid, mate.
Nah, that won't happen.
Hopefully it won't happen.
By the time spring comes, there'll be enough to get rid of this stupid virus. But I think for Melbourne, but I reckon my Tigers will. You got to go through Chicago at some stage.
Well, we've got to go through City Hall, and who's at the top of the food? We've got to go through Simba, the king of the jungle. We have to go through them eventually. And look, I think you're right. Though. If you look at it at the moment, we do a bit of a ladder thing every week, and we do say Richmond is still there. I actually tipped them not to make the 8. I've actually tipped them not to make the 8. Yeah.
What, from now?
From about 2 weeks ago, before the game against GWS. I thought that might have been a 50-50 because if you'd lost that one, that was an 8-point game.
That was the one I thought where they saved their season as well. But judging by the way I was behaving on the couch that night, I think my wife thought the same. No, the Tigers will be there. I'm not sure about the Dogs. Port Adelaide, I've got some doubts on as well. Geelong, I just still reckon. They recruited well, didn't they? With
Dad's Army,
the 3 they brought in, so they probably right up there as well. But it's yours to lose, mate.
Please don't say that. Hey, and just quickly with Geelong, I think another thing with the financial side of things is you're right. They want equality, but Geelong, if you're playing Richmond, you're not going to have a home final because of the number of people that they want in there.
But I understand that. I also think if you're Geelong, you got to play on the MCG. But look, there are all those anomalies, aren't there?
Little anomalies
across the competition. I don't go into that in the book either, actually fixturing and all that. But we
can write that one together. Can I say there is one anomaly which isn't in the book, and this is fact. Like I said, I can't keep spruiking how awesome this book is. To everybody listening to this today, I'm actually giving away a copy of it because it's that good. I wanted to give it into somebody's hands as well too. But it's just honest, it's raw, and the best thing, it's factual and it's easy to absorb too. Like you don't want to be blown away with facts. You just want to be, look, this is how it is, and you tell it how it is. And from the time that we've been speaking together, you've told it from the heart too, and that's what people deserve too. So I really appreciate you taking some time out today to get this done.
No drama, mate.
Is there anything else that you want to quickly finish up on that you will just want to share with us? Is there a little bit of a tidbit or a little bit of a juicy piece that you have that we're only going to be able to you're only going to be able to hear here?
No, I just hope that as many footy fans as possible can read the book, and I want people to know I'm not trying to bash the game because I love it. I played it since I was a kid as well. Played till I was 36.
Whereabouts?
In the amateurs, Peninsula Old Boys.
Okay.
So I played 210 games down there.
Nice.
Most of them were as an old man, a cripple in the reserves, but I still, so it's
twos footy's the best footy. You just enjoyed in the twos, beer after the game, bit of Motley Crue banging on the stereo afterwards.
I wasn't of that view originally when I was playing there.
Oh no, when you're young, it's different. I'm playing ones. I'm going to be dominating, and you get to the mid-30s, you're like, dude, who's got the beer? Yeah. We're finished. All right, who's got the Jimmy cans? Let's get on it.
Yeah, good. It is good.
Footy's awesome.
We had a guy, Sean Payes, who played his 400th game the other day, which
very
is,
nice.
In the amateurs. That's a hell of a lot of footy. But so it's not about tearing down the game. It's just saying the game can and should be better.
Yep. And
from a governance perspective.
And if we've got people like you writing about it every week, whether it's in the paper, whether it's in books like this, whether it's on 3AW, we're going to be in definitely a better spot. So
thanks, mate.
Mick Warner, appreciate everything, but I have just one simple question for you, and it comes simply down to this. Mick Warner, chief writer of The Boys Club, author of The Boys Club, Politics, Power, and the AFL, the number one book you want to read right now. How do you want your footy?
Lights out.
How good is he, everybody? There you go, listeners. There's Mick Warner. Spread this interview around. Tell everybody about it. Get on the book. And more importantly, I appreciate your time today.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks for listening to our latest episode. If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on iTunes. I'm your host, Chris Pepper, and with Jamie Wallace, we give you your footy how you want it. Peace out.